the media, politicians, society at large, policymakers, etc., etc. And again, we see this idea of them kind of falling between the cracks, because whilst they were judged by older women, older mothers, for their performance of motherhood because they were young, they were also judged by their friends and peers for their performance of youth. They were being kind of judged in two different directions. So on the one hand, they were being judged as mothers, and then on the other hand, they were being judged as young people, how they were performing, how well they were performing in these different roles. Needless to say, in both roles, they felt they were being judged as failing. They felt that they were being judged as bad mothers because they were young, and bad young people because they were mothers. They're all performing motherhood outside of the kind of normative model. And I think the dominant idea of a good mother is a woman maybe in her mid-30s, white, with a white partner, married, house that they own, financially stable, taking a couple of years out of her amazing career to look after these children. None of these women were doing that at all. It was a very non-normative way in which they were performing motherhood, and they felt that absolutely that was being judged very, very negatively. One of the effects of this, that they spoke about some spaces becoming off limits to them. So certain children's centres, certain soft play environments, certain sort of playgrounds, that they felt that they couldn't go because there was just too much judgment of them there. Some of them were older mums who were very judgmental of the fact that they were very young, and some of them were places where young people hang out, where they didn't really want to be seen sort of, with their child. One of the women actually said that she did go to playground once where there were lots of young people, and she told these young people that the baby was her sister because she didn't want to admit that she was such a young mum. What I think is really interesting about this kind of notion of space is that we know that space is highly gendered, okay? So we know that there are kind of male and female spaces, and that gender is kind of policed in these different spaces. If we look at Laura Bates's Everyday Sexism project, what we can see is that, public transport, and this is a matter close to my heart, that public transport is performed in a particular way by men. We have kind of manspreading and all that type of stuff, and sexual harassment and what have you. But actually what's interesting is that even within these gendered spaces, even within these spaces which are traditionally all female, there is still a kind of politics going on, that some women are welcomed because of the way that they are performing in those spaces, and yet other women aren't. And I think there's something really interesting to be done there, but I'm not really sure what, but I think it's a really interesting question to be asked. What's also interesting is cyber space, if you like, this kind of virtual space, as being quite off limits. They describe things like Facebook and parenting forums and Twitter and social media and things like that as being a hothouse of critical gazes, to the point where a lot of them had actually stopped using Facebook. What I find really interesting about this is the fact that we can, in some instances, understand social media as having the potential for some kind of mobilisation, for some kind of revolution. Again, going back to Laura Bates's Everyday Sexism project, this is absolutely being done on social media, and the momentum behind it is absolutely driven by social media. And we have this kind of idea of how positive that is. Yet for these women, it was experienced in a very, very different way, that kind of social media and cyberspace, as it were, sort of Web 2.0, user-generated internet, was a very hostile environment where the kind of revolutionary or certainly mobilising potential was kind of lost on them. The final point to make on this, which relates to the photograph that one of the women took, is that they thought that it was very different for dads. When dads posted pictures of their kids, it wasn't critiqued in the same way. It was always just, oh, this is a really good example of how you're such a good father. When they did post something wrong, as it were, the house being a complete mess, the child covered in food, they felt that there was always a kind of a sense of, oh, that's so funny, oh, you're having a mishap because you're, a dad, type of thing. Whereas for the women, they felt that was an indication of the fact that they were kind of failing at parenting. Reinforces the idea that it's kind of their responsibility, right? But it's not all doom and gloom. A lot of the women spoke about the way in which they kind of shout back, and again I'm using Laura Bates's notion of shouting back here, that they didn't often actually shout, although they sometimes did. This first slide is really about the way in which they talk back to people and kind of use talk in a particular way to construct really positive answers to this kind of judgment and surveillance. On the one hand, they develop these really positive discourses around parenting, around their family life, and around the transformation in their life that becoming a parent had entailed for them. So one of the participants in Bristol said, the earlier you have them, the longer you love them, which I think is really lovely, actually. And this picture that one of the participants in the North East took of her 3 children, clearly, and she said, so the stenciling says, the moments that made everything perfect. So there's this sense that her life has been kind of changed for the better by her 3 children. I should say that she's 21 with these 3 children, the oldest of which is 5. She's an absolutely incredible woman. And this isn't surprising, this finding. This is absolutely in the literature. The other sort of way that people spoke about this is saying, well, you know, people are always going to hate it, people are always going to judge whatever you do, just ignore them. And that I felt was really quite powerful, because I think that took a hell of a lot of strength for these women to ignore this kind of constant judgment that they felt they were under. And finally, one of the women said, well, I just tell people to shut the fuck up. If they say something to me about, you know, I just say, what the fuck has it got to do with you? This is my child, my life, but I. And again, this incredible strength. And if we think about this in gender terms, I really think this is a rejection by her of both the kind of norms of being a mum and being very mumsy, which is gendered politics, right? I think she's rejecting the judgment, and I also think she's rejecting this idea that she's, you know, a lovely sort of feminine mum and adhering to these kind of feminine ideals. You know, telling someone in public to their face to shut the fuck up is something really quite politically strong to do, I think, and really, really interesting. Not that I'm condoning, of course, going out and swearing at random people in the street. Another way that they kind of answered these sort of judgments that they felt that they were under was this emphasis on the traditional aspects of their family and their relationships, the sort of traditional and normative aspects of their everyday lives. There were a number of ways in which the women sort of spoke about this. They all said, well, all my children have the same father. That father is or was a long-term partner. I don't sleep around. My children aren't from one-night stands or some random friends with benefits. One of the women spoke about having a lot of respect for the father of her children, his Muslim family and their particular traditions, and she really cast herself in this role as a kind of secondary player in that relationship. Of course his family and his desires would come first, that's only right. Quite a few of them said, you know, I'm getting married soon and I have a ring, you know, and they were very keen to kind of show that they had that ring and that they kind of had a date booked and they thought about their dress, that this was happening, that this was legitimate, this was going ahead. And all of them, in every instance, spoke about the importance of working. They said, I don't rely on the state, I don't get benefits, I don't care what the media said, that's not me. I don't live in a council house, I don't do... All of the kind of judgmental discourses that they felt that they were subject to, that they were kind of really answering through this notion of working and being financially stable. Again, really sort of reinforcing the normative sense in which they were doing motherhood. When in fact, you know, they weren't doing motherhood in any sort of real normative sense. The idea that they felt that was a problem and actually had to be answered through a focus on the kind of traditional aspects of their life, I think is